This podcast is brought to you by WRFL, Radio Free Lexington. Find us online at wrfl.fm. Catch us on your FM radio while you're in Central Kentucky at 88.1 FM all the way to the left. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to subscribe.
Hi, welcome to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Lhotka, and I'm here with my co-host, Renee Williams. Today in studio, we have Stratton Hatfield. Stratton is a graduate student in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. And today we're going to be talking with him about his graduate work on the martial eagle in Kenya. So it's a pleasure to have you in studio today. And you received your bachelor's degree from the University of Kentucky in Natural Resources and Environmental Science in 2013. And then you mentioned you took a few years off, and now you're about to graduate with your Master of Science in Forest and Natural Resource Sciences. And congratulations on almost finishing up with your master's degree. And I know you're looking forward to being done with that.
Appreciate it.
Before we get started talking about your graduate work on martial eagles, tell us a little bit about your background and kind of where you're from.
First, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my work. So as you said, my name is Stratton Hatfield, so Hatfield as in Pike County Hatfields. My family is originally from southeastern Kentucky, but I was born and raised in Zimbabwe and Kenya in southern and eastern Africa. And yeah, I lived there up until I graduated from high school. And my parents both are from here, graduates of UK actually, both of them. And they moved to Angola in the 80s, and yeah, I guess the rest is history for me. I didn't have a choice.
Oh, that's good. So what got you interested in the kind of the natural resources thing?
Yeah, I guess I grew up, my dad's an agronomist. Okay. He's a grad of the College of Ag, and I grew up in nature. I have my parents to thank for that. You know, they made a conscious effort daily to put me out there in the bush, interacting with wildlife in particular. I remember vividly my dad giving me a radio as like an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and me going on walks and stalking rhino, and on the radio, Dad, there's a rhino. And my dad's like, be careful and, watch out. Rhino are blind, so you have to watch their sense of smell. And I just, experiences like that just left a big impression on me, and I fell in love with the natural world. And it was an obvious career path when I graduated high school. I've always wanted to do this, and so, yeah.
Well, that's good. And so what brought you back to UK?
What brought me back to UK? So I still have family here.
Okay.
And despite the fact that I was born and raised in Africa, I've maintained Kentucky residence since I was born, and as of my parents. And so, when I was applying to colleges, UK, I got in-state tuition, even though I've never lived here, but through our taxes and everything. I was able to receive some scholarships, and I really liked the NRES program. And so, it was good to be back here, spend some time where I was from, spend some time with my grandmother. It all made sense. So
that's good. That's great.
Yeah.
So tell us about your graduate research work. I know that you've been looking at the martial eagle in Kenya. Can you tell us how you got interested in that and kind of what you've been investigating over the last few years?
Well, I said that I love nature and being in the outdoors, but the real truth is I love birds, and I love birds. I'm obsessed, and since I was a little kid, I remember since I think I was 7 years old when I started bird watching, and not just enjoy walking outside with a pair of binoculars and enjoying birds, but listing, so keeping lists and identifying species. And I did that all through my undergrad here at UK. I would often leave I'd skip classes sometimes and chase birds all across the eastern United States. And I love birding. And so when I graduated, I went back to Kenya and I got a job working in the Masai Mara. And an opportunity arose to study eagles. And Dr. Cox and I had formed a friendship during my undergrad, and we had discussed and thrown around some graduate research ideas, and he had expressed his interest in doing some research in Kenya, and I really wanted to work with him. And so when this eagle opportunity came about, I wrote Dr. Cox and said, hey, I'd really like to study martial eagles. What do you think of this idea and this project? And yeah, he's been one of my biggest supporters, and so very grateful to him for that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Can you kind of paint a picture for our listeners of the region that you're working in? What does it look like?
Okay, so
a lot of people may not have traveled that area, but
I guess unfortunately the U.S. doesn't have large, expansive open grass, tall grass prairies anymore. We've lost them. We used to. We used to have some of the most incredible prairies in the world. And that's what the Mara is. And when Dr. Cox comes and visits, he always, reminisces about what, the U.S. would have been like had we not, plowed under all of our prairie and killed all of our bison. The Mara is part of the Mara Serengeti ecosystem. It's about 35,000 square kilometers of open prairie, woodland, savanna. It has home to the wildebeest migration that's so famous on Animal Planet and National Geographic, where all the wildebeest, everyone thinks they just commit suicide by jumping in the river when all the crocodiles come up and grab them and the lions are waiting on the shore. And it is like that. It's wonderful. It's, you get up in the morning, you drive up on top of a hill. I drive an old British military-style Land Rover that my dad and I have worked on since I was in high school, and it's my baby. And, a lot of off-road driving, drive up to these big hills, and you get out and you just look out, and it's just expansive wilderness. And when the migration is incredible, I often think about Lewis and Clark's journals when they went west, and they talk about the bison and hearing them and feeling them as they ran at night when the wildebeest run by. It can be hours of just constant noise, and you feel the ground shake with them running and the lions chasing them, and it's incredible. I mean, I really feel very fortunate to be able to work there and to experience these large megafauna, and and martial eagles are part of that. So So
tell us, what exactly is a martial eagle?
So a martial eagle, it's a good question. So I guess I'll start with what is a raptor.
Okay.
And so I guess a raptor is a bird of prey, and so it's a species that predates on other species, and that can also be through carrion. So vultures are also raptors, and so eagles are one of the largest types of raptors, and they typically prey on live prey and carrion as well. It's a bit of a mix. And the martial eagle is one of the largest eagle species we have in Africa. I guess it's comparable in size to a golden eagle that Kentucky would have in the winter. I know that is it Bernheim Forest in Louisville? I know they've been tagging a few golden eagles there. But martial eagles have a comparable wingspan, if not a little bit bigger. Weight's comparable. Their feet are much bigger though, so they're capable of killing larger prey items than golden eagles. Well, there's always exceptions. I don't know if that's true. Don't hold me to that one. Golden eagles can kill pretty large prey. And they're just they're a charismatic species, an apex predator. I call them sentinels because they fly high and they live a very long time. We don't know how long they live. We think it could be 40 plus years.
Oh, wow.
Maybe longer. I guess I haven't described a martial eagle to you all. Martial eagles are slate gray brown, starting from their chest up to their head, all down their back. They've got these piercing yellow eyes, and when you look into them, it really is. They always look like they're on a mission. I'm not going to say that they're mean, but they always look like they're on a mission. They've got these big kind of ridges above their eyes. I guess furrowed is the right term, and so they're always kind of glaring down, always very attentive and focused. And then their belly is very white with these very nice black speckles, and sometimes those speckles extend all the way down to their feet. And then they've got these really big feet. I can't begin to explain it to you on a radio show. It's hard. You just take your hands and look at your hands, and their feet are much bigger than your hands. Wow. And they've got huge talons, 6 centimeter talons. So that's 2 and a bit inches, 2 1/4 inches, wow, or 2.5 inches almost for the biggest talon. Just really impressive feet. And
how large is their wingspan?
Their wingspan. Yeah. So part of my work actually is taking these measurements. We don't have a lot of data on these birds. We have a few odds and ends records from here and there, but like large data sets from specific populations are lacking. Wingspans, let's say between 2 and 2.5 meters. Maybe an exceptional bird is a little bit bigger. I'm using metric. I should convert. What is that? 2 yards? I guess it's almost the same. It's pretty much the same. 2.5 yards. So it's a big bird.
It's a big bird. Yeah.
It's a big bird.
And why would you say that nothing had been done on these birds in the past?
Well,
is there a reason for that?
So Africa is an interesting place to work. And, growing up there, Well, I am American technically. I really do feel African. Born, going to school there, graduating high school there. All my friends are there. My family still lives there. It's a continent that has a lot of opportunity, and it has been, and there's not been a lot done. I say that hesitantly, though. Africa has it's a conflicting history. I'll say that colonialism was an interesting period, and there were a lot of colonial scientists and naturalists is probably the best term, who came out and did work. A lot of it was anecdotal in nature, but there's still a huge amount of information within those archives, and those archives are in many different languages, and I haven't had the opportunity to read them all. French, the French had a huge presence in Africa. The Dutch, the Swedes, surprisingly. There's a lot of information in Swedish that I have not been privy to, and that not many people are privy to. And but overall, since a lot of these countries gained independence, there hasn't been a lot of peer-reviewed quantitative work on these species. So what I mean by that is there haven't been a lot of researchers that are affiliated academically that are able to crunch numbers and do pretty long-term studies on these species. And so for a lot of these species, we're just starting to kind of begin that work. And it's an exciting process. And so partnering with I'm partnered with the National Museums of Kenya, the Department of Ornithology, Dr. Peter Njoroge. I'm partnered with Dr. Munir Virani. He's with the Peregrine Fund, and with lots of other partners, local partners in the Mara, trying to build our understanding of the species ecology. So it's exciting, and it's pioneering, and it's a great project. It's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
So what's the kind of your research question? What are you looking at for your graduate research?
So there's a lot that we need to there's a lot that we need to improve our understanding on. So there's been some work on martial eagle diet. There's been some work on martial eagle home ranges. We have to remember Africa is a huge continent. A lot of people just think Africa, it's 53 countries now. We just added one, South Sudan. A very diverse continent. Habitat-wise, you go from the unique Cape Floral region in South Africa all the way to the Sahara, the high Atlas Mountains. Actually, with some buddies that I graduated with, we went and climbed up to an equatorial glacier in Kenya, and high altitude, cold. So it's a very diverse continent, and so when one project is done someplace, it's hard to kind of say. You can't just say that's what martial eagles do. And so I'm trying to build off a lot of this work that's been done in other places. And so diet is one of the big things I'm interested in. So what do martial eagles eat? Very little has been done in East Africa. There's been a few studies done in Southern Africa. So trying to build on that knowledge. I'm very interested in non-breeding diets. So there's been a lot of work done with what eagles eat at the nest. It's a lot easier to study what eagles eat at the nest because it's a centralized location. But what they eat away from the nest is a lot harder to study, as you can imagine. We're using fancy transmitters that we're attaching to these eagles, and these transmitters are able to not only tell us where the eagle is, but they're also able to tell us what behavior the eagle is exhibiting. And so it's really cool cutting-edge technology that we're able to employ when trying to answer these questions. So why do I care about diet? Raptor populations globally are declining, and there was actually a paper released just last month by some of the individuals we're working with, and that paper unfortunately states that over 50% of raptor species globally are in fairly severe population decline, and martial eagles are unfortunately one of those species. And so there's a real urgent need to inform our understanding of these species so that we can, put into place conservation plans that make sense. And that's really challenging in Africa, where we have incredible human populations are booming across the continent, unlike anything that we currently see here in the United States. And that's putting huge amounts of pressure on remaining ecosystems and wild places. Martial eagles require a tremendous amount of space. That's another one of my questions, is how big is their home range? What kind of space do they require? And what kind of habitats do they need? And so it's a complicated situation. How best do we conserve the species? We don't know how many martial eagles are left in Africa. There was a paper published in 2017 that looked at bird watchers data in South Africa, and they reported a 60 to 70% decline in 20 years. And that was within both within protected areas as well, which is shocking. And so what's going on? We don't know. And we've got a lot more questions than we have answers. My work's just beginning to, kind of dive into a lot more of these quantitative questions, but we're getting there, and so it's growing. So yeah.
And so what are you finding their diet is?
Oh, their diet. Okay. So I'm as much as I am a conservation biologist, I really enjoy ecology and evolutionary biology, and so I'm really interested in reverse sexual dimorphism. So what that means is that in raptors and many eagle species, females are larger than males. So I'm really interested in looking at, do females, as a result of that, eat different prey items than males? And so what I'm finding is that females are eating, much heavier prey items. So like small antelope. And small pigs. So like a white-tailed deer yearling would be really nice for a martial eagle female. And she would, kill that animal and then hide it and potentially eat it for 3 or 4 days. They eat a lot. Females will also eat warthog piglets. So, Pumbaa from Lion King. And they eat a lot of timons, a lot of mongoose, both males and females. Males eat a lot of game birds, so a lot of francolin, like a grouse or guinea fowl. I think everyone knows a guinea fowl. Like bustards. I don't think there's anything like a bustard here in the United States. A smaller, slender turkey that lives in open grassland. And they also eat a lot of monitor lizards. So monitor lizards are invasive in Florida. So if you're in Florida, you probably know what they are. But they're monster lizards. Not like Komodo dragon's monster, but but they're big. And they can get up to like 2 yards long. And big. We've noticed a few really weird things. A domestic cat. I remember the transmitter data showed me that a marshal had made a kill, and I went to that location to see what it had eaten. And I drove up, and there was an elderly woman standing there next to her house. And the house wasn't on the map that I'd looked at. The Maasai are nomadic, so they move a lot. So I was like, oh, hello, how are you? And she told me that an eagle had eaten her cat the day before. And I smiled, oh, I'm sorry. And they do eat some domestic stock, and that's a big problem. And that's something I'm very interested in researching further, is that human-wildlife conflict matrix. So there's a lot of sheep and goats in the Masai Mara, and I'm worried that females in particular, are at risk from direct persecution. So females might be being killed as a result of eating sheep and goats, and so that's a big problem.
You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky with co-hosts Renee and Laura. We'll be right back after this short break.
Okay, before we get back to our main segment, we're going to listen to our wildlife sounds from the forest. And for those of you that might be new listeners to our show, each week we're going to have a brief sound bite for a wildlife sounds from the forest. And Dr. Matt Springer will introduce that sound. And then later in the show, we'll hear kind of his explanation of what the animal is and a full description of what that sound is. So let's listen to Dr. Springer.
For our segment on wildlife sounds of the forest, we're going to cover this noise here. We're going to talk about what makes it, why they make it, and what other versions they could hear in Kentucky for our animals.
Welcome back to From the Woods, Kentucky. I'm Laura Lhotka and joined with my co-host Renee Williams. And today we have in studio Stratton Hatfield, and he's been talking about martial eagles. Let's go back to that interview.
And the Masai Mara is about around 3,000 square kilometers. My study area technically is 2,350 square kilometers. But within that area, we're talking maybe 40 to 50 adult eagles. And so, if 4 or 5 are killed in a year, it's a big loss to a population. And so a lot of work needs to be done.
How do you capture the eagle?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It's obviously flying.
So I'll preface what I'm about to say that this is all IACUC approved, and that means that there's an ethics committee that approves our methods. So to all of you chicken lovers out there, I apologize for what I'm about to say. We use a trap called a bal chatri, and they were developed in the Middle East and in India thousands of years ago. Falconry is one of the oldest sports in the world, and it's more than a sport. Falconry is really a relationship between an individual and a bird, a lot like horse riding. I did some falconry when I was in school. And so we used one of these old falconry traps that they use to catch eagles in the wild. And what it consists of, a bal chatri, is a cage. And that cage, we put chickens inside of it. And then that cage is surrounded by snares. And these snares we hand make, and they're not self-tightening, which means that if one of them was to break, it would release from the bird. And the idea is you find an eagle, you drive up to it, and it's a balance. You don't want to scare the eagle off, but you also want to drop the trap in a place where the eagle can see it. And so you position it, and then you back off, and at times you back off a long way. And you watch with binoculars, and then you hope that the eagle is interested in the chickens and then goes down for the trap. And then as it's trying to get to the chickens, its feet get caught in the snares. And and then we run up and grab it, which is always an entertaining process. You have this monster bird trying to get you. Lots of good stories. And and then we put these transmitters on them, and these transmitters allow us to follow these eagles around. And so, it's a lot of fun. I've got a few mentors who've been teaching me the ropes, Simon Tomset and Shiv Kapila with the Kenya Bird of Prey Trust, who are incredible teachers and mentors and raptor handlers, and
How many birds are you watching?
So much. Currently, we are watching 20, okay. And that might not sound a lot, but it's almost 50% of our study population, our entire study population. So from a research perspective, that's really good. And it's by far the largest martial study that's ever been done. And very excited about that. And lots of good data. What do you do with that data, though, is the next question. So
what do you do when you're tracking them? Once you have the spatial aspect to your study?
So I guess one of my questions is what do they eat? Mm-hmm. And so, like with any research project, you pretend that you know your questions before you start, but actually your questions typically evolve as your project develops. And so we quickly learned that, holy cow, these transmitters actually work. You never really know if they're going to work when you first put them on, and that we can actually see where they're killing. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of was a big aha moment. This is going to work. And so what I did is I would look at the data on my computer, and I would see where a bird had killed. Mm-hmm. And it had to be really quick. So within a few hours of it killing, I had to see that. And then I was off on a mission to that location. Mm-hmm. And when you're driving off-road through rivers, rain, it's, to get to one eagle kill, sometimes it took me days to reach one kill. I mean, it was a lot of work, and then we go in and we identify that kill. And then these transmitters spatially, we're also trying to map home ranges. Mm-hmm. So what is the area that a martial eagle requires for day-to-day use, or for monthly use or annual use, for breeding period use? These are the questions that right now I'm looking at. I'm looking at home range overlap. So if home ranges don't overlap, you would say they're defending those home ranges from each other, so you can assume territorial behavior. If they overlap a lot, you can assume that they're kind of friendly with one another. And we're seeing that they don't overlap a lot at all, that they're actually quite territorial. And so we're learning a lot. It's great fun. And these transmitters are made by a guy in his office at his house in the Netherlands. He's a really cool dude. He sits at home all day and makes eagle transmitters. It's a pretty niche job. And they're solar powered. So.
Wow. So how do you know when they have a kill, I guess, or versus something else? I mean, what part of the transmission are you saying that you need to go investigate?
This is a great question. So most transmitters collect data based on set intervals. So you can program your transmitter and tell it, I would like my transmitter to collect data every hour or every 6 hours. Normally it's based on battery life. Power is always the limiting factor when you place a transmitter on an animal that's not connected to a grid, right? And, with eagles, we're able to utilize the sun as a power source, solar, which gives us a lot more opportunities than, for instance, bear biologists, where bears are hibernating or in the under canopy all day long. And so these transmitters are able to collect really high-frequency data. If we wanted them to, we could get data every second. But Theo Gerrit, who's the programmer of these transmitters, came up with an idea, and he said, I bet you I can develop an algorithm that will collect data at different rates based on the movement of the eagle and the angle of the transmitter. So what this transmitter does is these transmitters sit on the bird's back. We harness them like a backpack. And they're very lightweight, 27 grams. And essentially, as that bird moves, it has an accelerometer, a triaxial accelerometer built into the transmitter. It senses how that bird is moving, and it changes the rate of data collection. And so what we learned quickly is that when a bird was stationary and that bird was feeding, so you can imagine that transmitter on its back is going up and down as that bird is plucking and eating, that transmitter records that as a fairly unique behavior. And so I'm able to look at the data and say, wow, that's a cluster of points collected at really short intervals. So that's a key thing, is that when that bird was moving at that angle, we could say, okay, let's collect data at every 30 seconds or every minute, versus if a bird was still, we would say it's going to collect it every hour. So when I saw those really high frequency clusters of data, that means a kill. And so I was able to go to those locations and find what they were eating with remarkable accuracy. It was really, I'm not the best with statistics, and I'm not the best with computer programming. So for me to see this actually working, my mind was blown. I was all about it. And it was a really cool aspect of our project.
That's neat. And so what would you find when you get there?
Sometimes you'd find the eagle still feeding, which was always great. And then sometimes all you would find was hair, and then I had to put it under a microscope to ID what the eagle had eaten. And sometimes just a big cluster of feathers. The most interesting one is working in the Mara. You can imagine when you're on foot, it's quite an interesting experience. It's not like in Kentucky when you get out of the car, you might be worried about a rattlesnake or maybe a bear in East Kentucky. I don't know. Bears are not even that bad. In Kenya, I'm worried about buffalo and elephants and lions. So there were some kills where I would have to walk, huge distances through thick bush to get to these kill locations. And I remember one time coming up to a kill, and I'm following my GPS, and I looked ahead of me, and there was a big leopard on the martial eagle kill looking at me. And I remember going, whoa. But I was able to ID the kill really quick, which is good. And then got out of there, and the leopard backed up. And so, it was an entertaining... It was an entertaining few years. It took a long time to collect the 200 kills that I was able to collect, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It's a whole lot of data. So, yeah.
That's good. So what's next for you? You're defending this week, and what are you going to do?
Yeah, I made a classic error. It was my own fault. I wanted to do too much for my master's, and Dr. Cox had to kind of, put me back, into perspective. And so I've collected a lot of data, and I'm excited about... I analyzed some of it for my master's, and I spoke to Dr. Cox and to our research team, and I'm going to be continuing my education and pursuing a PhD. And so I'm very excited to be taking this data set and, continuing to learn more, expanding our project. I'm also talking to Dr. Cox right now. We're trying to set up a small nonprofit / long-term research project in Kenya. We're calling it the Mara Raptor Project. We hope to expand the number of species we're studying. And develop it into a little fledgling conservation project. And so I'm excited to be leading that, and getting a doctorate and learning more is the big thing about martial eagles and other species.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I'll put in a plug. The University of Kentucky, specifically the Forestry Department, has been of huge support. And being, I guess, from here technically, from Eastern Kentucky, to be able to do research in Africa, my home. And to have the Forestry Department support me so much has been fantastic. And it's been a dream come true for me. I don't think many people, I'm very fortunate that what I've wanted to do since I was a little kid, I'm able to do now. And so, it's exciting.
That's good. Well, your research sounds fascinating. That's great.
I hope it's of value. I think that's the big question. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and so what would you say is the kind of the importance of studying this species? What's kind of the big picture, I guess?
The big picture. I guess there's two things. The first is apex predators like martial eagles are incredibly important for ecosystem health. In Kentucky, for instance, we look at deer populations a lot, and huge populations of deer are problematic, and we're always trying to get hunters out, and we're increasing the limits on deer and changing our zones from counties, zone 4 to zone 1. Zone 1 you can shoot, I think, as many does as you want. And that's really in response to our lack of predators. We don't have cougars and wolves knocking down our deer populations like we used to. And I think there's those classic seminal papers from Yellowstone that talk about the introduction of wolves and how that completely changed ecosystems. And in the Mara, it's a much more complicated system. We've got a whole suite of apex predators, but each one has a very important role. And learning more about apex predators is critical. We need them to maintain healthy ecosystems, and their loss can result in something we call a trophic cascade, which is essentially, you can imagine just like a domino effect, whereby things down the food chain are affected, and the effect gets larger and larger and larger as you go down the food chain. And so that's the number one reason why I'm doing this work, is to inform martial eagle conservation so that we continue to have these apex predators. I think on a much broader front, though, the world is facing a biodiversity, I'm going to use the word apocalypse, because I really do believe that's what it is. We're losing species at rates that we don't even understand. A lot of people are saying we're definitely in the Anthropocene period, and we're definitely facing another mass extinction on our hands. Whether we come to grips with that or not right now, I'm not sure, but I think history will tell a story, or the future will tell a story. And I think doing everything we can to preserve species is important. I use preserve very carefully, though, because I'm not a conservationist. I think that's a tough word. To conserve means to maintain and to keep constant, and that's not what we should be doing. We need to be providing organisms with the ability to continue to evolve in changing circumstances. And I do think that as ecologists, we fail to do that often. We don't think about that. Climate change is a huge problem in the world that we live in today, and giving species the opportunity to adapt is what we need to do. And hopefully my work, helps inform martial eagle conservation. Once again, the word conservation, so that we can allow them that opportunity. And unfortunately, you need a lot of space in order to do that. You need corridors, you need protected systems that stretch from, one latitude to the next. And so that you can, take advantage of all of these different climactic gradients. And it's difficult. It really is challenging. And I'm a very small drop in a much larger bucket of information that lots of people are putting together. So, yeah.
Okay, so tell us why people in central Kentucky should be caring about this species of birds.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. It really is. And this might sound a bit abstract, because I do think that today, if the martial eagle went extinct, people in central Kentucky, would go about their day like it was any other.
Right.
But I do think that the biodiversity crisis is a global issue. And I think that we as Kentuckians, as central Kentuckians, should care about biodiversity on a global scale. We benefit from biodiversity from around the world, whether we know it or not, whether that's through the medicines we take or through the products that we purchase. Genetic engineering is getting quite fancy, and we're using, pieces of code from species from around the world. When I say code, I mean DNA. It's quite an abstract question. I think that, we will eventually reach a point, though, whereby when we lose too many species, I don't know, we're in trouble. In many ways, we're shooting ourselves in our own foot. Okay. And I think that we should all do our part to care about biodiversity globally. I do think climate change is an important thing. I think climate change connects the world. Decisions that we make here in Kentucky affect Africa, and decisions that are made in Africa affect Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And we need to do our best to inform ourselves. And the internet is an incredible thing, and we can learn so much from that. And I would challenge you to learn more about climate change and about things that you can do. It's something that I constantly challenge with. You might be thinking, well, you travel around the world on a plane. And I do. It's something I really, really struggle with, is the carbon I burn when I fly. And I'm hoping to kind of get over there and stay over there. I'll be honest. It's a conflicting thing. I encourage you to think critically about the choices you make, and to make better choices. That's a hard thing to do.
Well, you've presented us with a lot of great information, and that may have been your take-home point, but were there other, maybe one or two take-home points beyond that you would like our listeners to come up with?
Yeah, I think appreciate the bald eagle. I was reading a report about bald eagles in Kentucky, and this year had a record number of breeding bald eagles in the state. And the population was growing, especially in the eastern and the central United States, which is just remarkable when you think that 40, 50 years ago, there were no bald eagles breeding here in East Kentucky. I think 40 years ago. I know that in 1986, I think the first breeding pair came back. And don't take that for granted. That was a result of lots of legislation and lots of work by thousands of individuals. And conservation, the preservation of species is a big deal. And I was cleaning up the Licking River 2 weekends ago, pulling tires out, and a bald eagle flew over. It's just the greatest feeling in the world to know that they're there. I was in Pendleton County, and appreciate them, because they might not be there forever. So, yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and we wish you all the best on your future endeavors after you leave here. And we appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us today. So, for those of you listening, if you'd like more information on what you heard on this segment of today's show, visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org, and stay tuned for Wildlife Sounds from the Forest.
So tell us what we just heard.
So that in the birding community is commonly called a squeaky wheel, and that's a black and white warbler, a male, singing, usually in the spring, to advertise to other females that he's there looking for a mate.
Okay, so last week you told us that the birds sang to advertise their territories. So it can be both?
Correct, it can. And this week we're going to talk a lot about mate advertisement, but in this scenario with our songbirds, they will actually use that sound to both advertise for a mate and protect their territories. And that's because the females that they're trying to call to bring in are looking for the best territory. So in a way, they're defending the territory while saying, I have this area and you should come see me.
Okay, so how do other wildlife species advertise for mates then?
Well, they do in a couple different ways. One of the more impressive things that wildlife species do is kind of related to our elk and deer. They actually, every year, the males will grow their antlers, which is a really amazing feat that they put on that much bone in about 3 months of time. And that antler set that they have that year is a direct advertisement to the females on how healthy that male is that year. Along with that, though, some of them, like the elk, will vocally advertise how healthy they are in combination with those antlers. So you'll hear this sound right about, mid-September. And that's the male calling to cows around them saying, I'm really big, I'm in shape, I'm better than the other bulls you hear, come on over to me and join my harem.
Okay.
Now, other animals do something completely different and may not make any sounds at all. So we have a species that stands on a log and drums away. And it sounds like this. And that's our ruffed grouse. And they will do that in early or late winter and early spring. And they'll find a log in a clear-cut early successional habitat and stand on the log and drum for a couple minutes and then wait and see if a female comes walking up to them. Whereas we have another bird that does a somewhat of a dance like that with the woodcock or timberdoodle, who will actually walk like an Egyptian and make some peeping noises and then do a flight up in the air and spin to the ground as a way to try to attract the mate as well.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about mammals and birds, so what do amphibians do?
So amphibians do their own calling. It's not territory related like the birds do, but a lot of times it's really directly related to the water source that they're hoping to mate in and have the females lay their eggs in. So you may come up to a pond and hear 5-6 different species of frogs all calling at once, and in certain situations it's almost deafening.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. We appreciate you coming in today.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to From the Woods, Kentucky. If you have any questions about things that you heard on today's show, please visit our website at www.fromthewoodsky.org. Stay tuned each Thursday from 10 to 11 a.m. for another edition of From the Woods, Kentucky.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this podcast from WRFL Lexington, you may enjoy our live radio stream at WRFL.FM and, of course, via radio at 88.1 FM in the Central Kentucky area. We have a wide variety of programs you're sure to enjoy. Just go to WRFL.FM/schedule and see what programs appeal most to you. Thanks again for listening to this podcast from WRFL Lexington.